Father and daughter vanished in 1986, 15 years later. Their station wagon turns up at Nevada Junkyard. The March wind cut through the Nevada desert like a blade, carrying sand and memories across the sprawling junkyard that stretched beyond the horizon. Rows of rusted vehicles sat like skeletal remains under the pale morning sun, their stories buried beneath decades of dust and neglect. Marcus Chen adjusted his baseball cap and squinted at the invoice in his weathered hands. 15 years of running Chen's auto salvage had taught him to spot valuable parts from a mile away, but this particular delivery from a towing company in Carson City had caught his attention for different reasons entirely. The 1985 Ford Country Squire station wagon sat apart from the other vehicles, its once proud burgundy paint now faded to the color of dried blood. What struck Marcus wasn't its condition, he'd seen worse, but the meticulous way someone had preserved it. No major rust damage, minimal dents, and the interior still intact despite sitting abandoned for God knows how long. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number on the paperwork. Desert Towing, this is Jake. Jake, this is Marcus from Chen's Salvage. I've got questions about that 85 Ford you brought in yesterday. Where'd you find it? Hold on, let me check. Papers rustled through the receiver. Right, that one? Found it in a ravine about 40 miles east of Reno. Hiker spotted it last week and called it in. Sheriff's department had us haul it after they processed it. Marcus frowned. Processed it for what? Missing persons case, apparently. Real old one. Sheriff Martinez said the plates matched some family that disappeared back in the 80s. Father and daughter, I think. The connection felt tenuous, like trying to grasp smoke. Marcus had been running the salvage yard since 1995, and he'd learned that old cars often carried more than spare parts. They carried stories. But this felt different, more urgent. You got any more details? Names, maybe? Martinez might have more info. All I know is they traced the registration to some town in Oregon. Pendleton, I think. Family name was... Hold on. Morrison. Yeah, David Morrison and his daughter. Marcus scribbled the information on the back of his invoice. After hanging up, he stood in the desert silence, studying the station wagon with new eyes. The vehicle's windows were down, and he could see personal items scattered across the seats. A child's coloring book, a coffee mug, a road atlas open to Nevada. He climbed into the driver's seat, noting how the keys still dangled from the ignition. The seats were covered in a thin layer of dust, but underneath, the fabric remained surprisingly intact. On the dashboard, a small plastic figurine of a horse caught his attention, the kind a child might cherish during a long road trip. The glove compartment opened with a soft click, revealing a stack of maps, registration papers, and a small leather journal. Marcus handled the journal carefully, its pages brittle with age. The handwriting inside was precise, masculine. Day 3 of our adventure. Sarah spotted wild horses this morning. She's convinced we can catch one and bring it home. I don't have the heart to tell her we're just passing through. Tomorrow we head to that mining town she read about in her adventure book. She's so excited about finding real treasure. Marcus flipped through more pages, each entry painting a picture of a father and daughter on what seemed like a planned vacation. The entries stopped abruptly on a page dated July 15, 1986. A chill ran down his spine despite the desert heat. He'd found missing persons cases before, usually just stolen cars or insurance fraud, but this felt different, personal, real. The back of the station wagon held camping gear, suitcases and toys. A small pink sleeping bag was rolled neatly in one corner, next to a larger blue one. 2 lives, interrupted mid-journey. Marcus pulled out his phone again and searched for the Pendleton Police Department. The call connected after 3 rings. Pendleton Police, Officer Davis speaking. Officer, this is Marcus Chen from Nevada. I run an auto salvage yard, and I've got a situation. We just received a vehicle that apparently belongs to a missing persons case from your area. 1985 Ford Country Squire registered to David Morrison. A pause. Hold on, sir. Let me transfer you to Detective Sullivan. She handles our cold cases. While waiting, Marcus noticed something glinting beneath the passenger seat. He reached down and pulled out a small silver locket on a broken chain. Inside was a photograph of a man and a young girl, both smiling at the camera. The man had kind eyes and graying temples, while the girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, had pigtails and was missing her front teeth. Detective Sullivan here. I understand you found the Morrison vehicle. Yes, ma'am. It was discovered in a ravine outside Reno. The local sheriff's department processed it and released it to my salvage yard. I'm calling because—" Marcus hesitated. "Because there are personal effects in here, and this feels like more than just an abandoned car. Mr. Chen, the Morrison case has been active for 15 years. David Morrison and his 8-year-old daughter Sarah disappeared in July 1986 while on a camping trip through Nevada. David was a high school teacher here in Pendleton, recently divorced. His ex-wife, Linda Morrison, still lives in the area." Marcus felt the weight of the locket in his palm. "Detective, I think someone should come look at this vehicle. There's a journal in here, personal items. It doesn't look like an accident or breakdown. It looks like they just vanished. I appreciate your call, Mr. Chen. We'll send someone to Nevada to examine the vehicle. In the meantime, please don't disturb anything else. This could be the break we've been waiting for." After ending the call, Marcus sat in the station wagon's driver's seat, surrounded by the echoes of an interrupted journey. The desert wind whistled through the open windows, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and something else, something that reminded him of old secrets and buried truths. He looked at the photograph in the locket again. The father and daughter smiled back at him across the decades, frozen in a moment of happiness that had somehow led to this lonely ending in a Nevada junkyard. But Marcus had learned that endings weren't always what they seemed, and sometimes the most important discoveries happened when you least expected them. The station wagon held its secrets close, but Marcus could feel them stirring, like dust disturbed by the wind. Somewhere in Oregon, a woman named Linda Morrison was about to learn that her family's story wasn't over yet. Linda Morrison's kitchen window faced east toward the Blue Mountains, where the morning light painted the Oregon peaks in shades of gold and amber. She stood at the sink, coffee mug in hand, watching the familiar sunrise she'd witnessed for 29 years in the same house on Elm Street. The call came at 7:43 a.m., just as she was preparing for another day at Pendleton Elementary, where she'd taught 3rd grade for the past decade. The number on her phone showed the police department, and her heart performed the same painful skip it had executed hundreds of times over the past 15 years. "Mrs. Morrison, this is Detective Sullivan. I need to speak with you about David and Sarah's case." Linda's grip tightened on the mug. "What is it now, Detective? Another false lead? Someone thinks they saw Sarah at a shopping mall in Portland?" "No, ma'am. This is different. We found their car." The mug slipped from Linda's fingers, shattering against the kitchen floor. Coffee spread across the linoleum like spilled blood, but she couldn't move to clean it up. The words echoed in her mind. "We found their car. Mrs. Morrison, are you there?" "Where?" The word came out as a whisper. "Nevada, in a ravine outside Reno. It's been there for years, possibly since they disappeared. We're sending a team to examine it today." Linda sank into the nearest chair, her legs suddenly unreliable. What condition is it in? Did you find—" "The vehicle is intact, ma'am. There are personal effects inside, but no remains. I want to stress that this is just the beginning of our investigation." After Detective Sullivan explained the details, the hiker's discovery, the salvage yard, the journal entries, Linda sat in her kitchen surrounded by the detritus of her shattered morning routine, the broken mug, the spilled coffee, the half-eaten piece of toast that now seemed impossible to swallow. She called in sick to work, something she'd done only twice in 10 years, both times related to David and Sarah. The first had been their memorial service, 3 years after they'd disappeared. The second was the day she'd finally packed away Sarah's bedroom, unable to maintain the shrine any longer. The house felt different now, charged with possibility and dread. Linda walked through the rooms, seeing them as if for the first time. The living room where David used to grade papers, while Sarah colored beside him. The kitchen table where they'd planned their adventure vacation to Nevada, Sarah's eyes bright with excitement about camping under the stars. In the hallway, school photos chronicled Sarah's brief life: kindergarten with her gap-toothed smile, 1st grade with her hair in careful braids, 2nd grade where she'd insisted on wearing her Lucky Horse t-shirt. The photos stopped at 3rd grade, the year she'd disappeared. Linda climbed the stairs to Sarah's room, which she'd converted into a sewing space but never quite managed to make feel like anything other than a memorial. Sarah's bed was gone, replaced by a cutting table, but the closet still held her clothes, size 3T to size 8, a progression that would never continue. She sat on the chair beside the window, Sarah's reading corner, and let herself remember the last conversation she'd had with her daughter. It had been awkward, stilted by the divorce proceedings and Linda's own hurt feelings about David's plans. "Mom, Dad says we're going to find real treasure in Nevada, like pirates but in the desert." "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. Just remember to listen to your father and stay close to him." "I will. And Mom, Dad says maybe you can come with us next time. Would you like that?" Linda had smiled and said maybe, but inside she'd been thinking about custody arrangements and court dates and all the adult complications that had nothing to do with an 8-year-old's dreams of adventure. The phone rang, jolting her back to the present. Detective Sullivan again. "Mrs. Morrison, I wanted to update you on what we've learned. The vehicle's last known location was a gas station in Winnemucca, Nevada, on July 15, 1986. The attendant remembered them because Sarah was excited about seeing wild horses. She loved horses, used to draw them constantly. We're working with Nevada authorities to reconstruct their route. It appears they were heading towards some old mining towns in the eastern part of the state. Do you remember David mentioning any specific destinations?" Linda closed her eyes, trying to recall David's planning sessions with Sarah. He bought her a book about ghost towns and mining camps. She was fascinated by the idea of finding abandoned places. David thought it would be educational. "Do you still have the book?" It might be in the basement. David kept a lot of his teaching materials down there. I never had the heart to go through everything." "Mrs. Morrison, I know this is difficult, but we're going to need to examine anything that might give us clues about their intended destination. The more we know about their plans, the better we can reconstruct what happened." After the call, Linda stood at the top of the basement stairs, looking down into the darkness. She'd avoided the basement for years, unable to face the boxes of David's life that she'd hastily packed after accepting that he wasn't coming home. The basement smelled of dust and old paper, with an underlying scent of the lavender sachets she'd used to keep moths away from stored clothes. Box after box lined the walls, each one labeled in her careful handwriting. David's books, teaching materials, Sarah's toys, photo albums. She found the book in a box marked Sarah's Room, Ghost Towns and Mining Camps of Nevada, by some local historian. The pages were well thumbed, with Sarah's careful notes in the margins. Little hearts drawn next to towns with names like Treasure Hill and Silver City, a child's interpretation of adult adventure. But it was the loose paper tucked inside the back cover that made Linda's breath catch. A hand-drawn map in David's precise handwriting, showing a route from Winnemucca to a cluster of small towns in central Nevada. Circled in red was a place called Copper Ridge with a note. Sarah's Choice, active mining operation tours available. Linda stared at the map, her hands trembling. For 15 years, she'd wondered where they'd gone, what had happened to them. Now she had a destination, a concrete place to focus her grief and hope. She photographed the map and the book's annotated pages, then called Detective Sullivan back. "Detective, I found something. A map David drew showing their planned route. They were headed to a place called Copper Ridge." "Copper Ridge. Let me research that. Mrs. Morrison, I want to prepare you for what might come next. We're going to be asking difficult questions, examining possibilities you might not want to consider." Linda looked around the basement at the boxes of her former life. "Detective, I've been considering every possibility for 15 years. I just want to know what happened to my family." After hanging up, Linda sat among the boxes, holding the book that had sparked her daughter's imagination and possibly led to her disappearance. Outside, the Oregon wind rattled the basement windows, but inside, the silence was profound. She opened the book to a chapter about Copper Ridge, reading about its history as a copper mining town that had experienced a brief revival in the 1980s. The text mentioned guided tours, a small museum and a mining company that had been trying to extract remaining copper from the old workings. But it was the final paragraph that made her blood run cold. Copper Ridge Mining Company ceased operations in September 1986, following a series of accidents and the mysterious disappearance of several visitors. The town has remained largely abandoned since then. Linda stared at the words, her mind racing. They'd disappeared in July 1986. The mining company had shut down in September. The timing couldn't be coincidental. She climbed the stairs back to the kitchen, where the broken mug still lay scattered across the floor. But instead of cleaning it up, she left it there, a reminder that some things, once broken, revealed truths that had been hidden for far too long. Detective Ray Martinez had worked for the Washoe County Sheriff's Department for 12 years, and in that time, he'd learned to trust his instincts. When the hikers reported the station wagon in Dead Horse Canyon, something about the scene had bothered him. The vehicle was too well preserved, too carefully positioned. It didn't look like an accident. Now, sitting in his office with the Morrison case file spread across his desk, those instincts were screaming louder than ever. The Oregon detective, Sullivan, had faxed over everything they had on the father and daughter who'd vanished in 1986. The timeline was tight, the destination clear, and the questions multiplying. Martinez pulled up a map of central Nevada on his computer, tracing the route from Winnemucca to Copper Ridge. It was a journey that would take them through some of the most isolated country in America, perfect for someone who wanted to disappear or make someone else disappear. His phone buzzed with a text from his partner, Detective Amy Reeves. Heading to Copper Ridge, ETA 2 hours, place is dead as advertised, as dead as E. Martinez had sent Reeves to scout the abandoned mining town while he worked the paper trail. Copper Ridge had been a boom and bust operation, the kind that Nevada specialized in. Rich veins of copper had attracted investors in the early 1980s, but by 1986, the operation was struggling. The company had finally folded after what the state records described as operational difficulties and safety concerns. He picked up his phone and dialed the number for the Nevada State Mining Division. Jim Porter speaking. Mr. Porter, this is Detective Martinez with Washoe County. I'm calling about the Copper Ridge Mining Company. They shut down in 1986 and I need to know why. Copper Ridge. Yeah, that was a mess. Hold on, let me pull the file. Paper rustled. Here we go. Copper Ridge Mining Company, operated by a man named Harold Brennan. They had a small operation going, maybe 20 employees at peak. Started having problems in summer of '86. What kind of problems? Safety violations mostly. Brennan was cutting corners, ignoring regulations. But the final straw was when tourists started going missing. Martinez sat up straighter. Missing tourists? Yeah. Brennan was running these underground tours to bring in extra cash. Families would pay to see the mine workings, get a taste of the Old West. But people started disappearing. Never found the bodies, but the families raised hell. State shut them down in September. How many people went missing? Let me see. Official count was 4. Family of 3 from California and a single woman from Utah. But there were rumors of more. Brennan claimed they must have wandered off into the desert, but the families never bought it. Martinez felt the familiar tingle of a case about to break open. Where's Brennan now? Dead. Killed himself about a year after the shutdown. Left a note saying he couldn't live with what happened, but never specified what that meant. And the mine? Sealed by the state. Too dangerous to leave open. But detective, if you're thinking about going out there, be careful. That whole area is unstable. Old mine shafts, abandoned equipment. People still get lost out there. After ending the call, Martinez stared at the map on his computer screen. 4 confirmed disappearances, plus David and Sarah Morrison, all within a few months of each other, all connected to Copper Ridge. His phone rang. Reeves. Ray, you need to get out here. This place is unsettling. What did you find? The town's mostly collapsed, but there's someone living here. An old man named Pete Kowalski. Says he was a security guard for the mining company. He's been squatting in one of the old buildings for years. Did he remember the Morrisons? That's the thing. He remembers everyone. Ray, this guy's been keeping records. Names, dates, descriptions of everyone who came through here in 1986. He's been waiting for someone to ask the right questions. Martinez grabbed his jacket and keys. I'm on my way. Keep him talking, but don't spook him. If he's been sitting on information for 15 years, there's a reason. The drive to Copper Ridge took Martinez through some of the loneliest country in America. Miles of sagebrush and distant mountains, broken only by the occasional abandoned ranch or rusted mining equipment. The kind of landscape that swallowed secrets and kept them forever. Copper Ridge itself was a ghost town in the truest sense. Buildings leaned against each other like old men sharing stories, their windows dark and empty. The mining company's headquarters was a low concrete building that had somehow survived the desert's attempts to reclaim it. Martinez found Reeves sitting with an elderly man on the porch of what might have once been a general store. Pete Kowalski was thin and weathered, with eyes that had seen too much and recorded everything. You're the detective from Reno, Kowalski said as Martinez approached. Amy here tells me you're asking about the summer of '86. That's right, Mr. Kowalski. We're investigating the disappearance of David and Sarah Morrison. Kowalski nodded slowly. I remember them, father and daughter. Little girl was excited about seeing a real mine. Father was nervous, kept asking about safety procedures. What happened to them? Same thing that happened to all the others. They went down into the mine with Harold Brennan, and only Harold came back up. Martinez felt his pulse quicken. You're saying Brennan killed them? I'm saying Harold Brennan was a sick man who saw an opportunity. Remote location, desperate business, people nobody would miss right away. He started small, single travelers, drifters, but then he got bold, started taking families. Kowalski stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the desert. I tried to stop him, confronted him after the California family went missing. But Harold was connected, you know, had friends in the county government, paid off the right people. Who was going to believe a washed-up security guard? Why didn't you report it to the state police? With what proof? Bodies were hidden somewhere in the mine system, miles of tunnels, some going back to the 1800s. Harold knew every inch of that place. He could have hidden an army down there. Reeves leaned forward. Pete, show Detective Martinez what you showed me. Kowalski disappeared into the building and returned with a wooden box. Inside were dozens of photographs, tourists posing at the mine entrance, families excited about their underground adventure. Martinez recognized several faces from missing persons reports. I took these for the company newsletter, Kowalski explained. Proof that we were running a legitimate operation. Harold always made sure to get photos of the families before they went down. Martinez found the photo of David and Sarah Morrison near the bottom of the box. Father and daughter stood beside a sign reading, Copper Ridge Mine Tours, Adventure Awaits. David's arm was around Sarah's shoulders, and she was grinning at the camera, a small horse figurine clutched in her hand. This was taken the day they disappeared, Kowalski said. July 15th, 1986. Harold told me later that there had been an accident in the mine, a cave-in. Said the father and daughter must have panicked and run deeper into the tunnels. But I knew better. Why didn't you leave? Why stay here all these years? Kowalski's eyes were haunted. Because someone needed to remember. Someone needed to be here when the questions finally came. I've been waiting 15 years for you to show up, Detective. Martinez looked at the photographs, each one representing a life cut short by Harold Brennan's madness. Mr. Kowalski, we're going to need your help. Official statements, testimony. Are you willing to do that? I've been ready for 15 years. As the sun set over the Nevada desert, Martinez stood in the abandoned mining town, feeling the weight of 15 years of secrets finally beginning to surface. The Morrison case was about to become something much bigger, a serial killer operating in one of the most isolated places in America, protected by distance and corruption. But Harold Brennan was dead, and the mine was sealed. The question now was whether they'd ever find the bodies of David and Sarah Morrison, or if the desert would keep their secrets forever. Martinez pulled out his phone and called Detective Sullivan in Oregon. Detective, we've got a situation here. The Morrison case is connected to at least 4 other disappearances. We're looking at a serial killer who used a mining operation as his hunting ground. Dear God, are you sure? As sure as I can be without bodies. But Detective, there's something else. The mine is sealed, but we're going to need to open it. If we want to find David and Sarah Morrison, we're going to have to go underground. The Nevada State Mining Division office in Carson City buzzed with unusual activity for a Tuesday morning. Engineer Janet Crawford had been pulled from her vacation to meet with law enforcement about reopening a mine that had been sealed for 15 years. The request was unprecedented and dangerous, exactly the kind of challenge that made her love her job. Detective Martinez spread architectural drawings across the conference table, his finger tracing the maze of tunnels that comprised the Copper Ridge mine system. According to these plans, the main shaft goes down about 300 feet, with lateral tunnels branching off at multiple levels. Those plans are from 1952, Crawford said, adjusting her glasses. The mining company did extensive modifications in the 1980s. Some of those new tunnels aren't on any official record. Martinez looked up from the drawings. Meaning? Meaning Harold Brennan could have created hiding places that nobody knew about. If he was using the mine to dispose of bodies, he would have had unlimited opportunities to create concealed chambers. Detective Sullivan had driven over from Oregon and stood at the window looking out at the mountains in the distance. How dangerous is it to reopen the mine? Extremely. It's been sealed for 15 years. We're talking about potential cave-ins, toxic gases, unstable structures. The state sealed it because it was too dangerous to leave open. Martinez tapped his pen against the table. What would we need to do it safely? Crawford pulled out a thick manual. Full hazmat team, structural engineers, mining specialists. We'd need to test the air quality, shore up the entrance, install ventilation systems. We're talking about a major operation. How long? 2 weeks minimum just to make it safe enough to enter. And that's if we don't encounter any major structural problems. The room fell silent. Martinez was thinking about Pete Kowalski, still camped out in Copper Ridge waiting for answers that had been buried for 15 years. Detective Sullivan was thinking about Linda Morrison, who had already waited too long for closure. There's another option, Crawford said slowly. Ground-penetrating radar. We can map the mine system without opening it, identify any anomalies that might indicate remains. How accurate is that? Depends on the conditions, but it would be safer and faster than a full excavation. Martinez made the decision. Let's start with the radar. If we find something, then we talk about opening the mine. 3 days later, the radar team arrived at Copper Ridge. The abandoned town looked even more desolate, with the addition of trucks and equipment scattered around the sealed mine entrance. Pete Kowalski watched from his porch as technicians set up their instruments. Dr. Sarah Chen, the radar specialist, had worked on dozens of archaeological sites, but this was her first missing persons case. We're looking for density anomalies, she explained to Martinez. Human remains would show up as areas of different composition than the surrounding rock. The radar equipment looked like oversized lawnmowers, pushing waves of electromagnetic energy deep into the earth. On her laptop screen, Chen watched as the underground world of Copper Ridge revealed itself layer by layer. The main shaft appears stable, she said, pointing to the screen, but there are areas where the tunnel walls have been modified. See these irregular chambers? They're not on the original mine plans. Martinez leaned over her shoulder. How many chambers? At least 6 that I can identify, and Detective, 3 of them show significant density anomalies. The implications hung in the air like smoke. 3 chambers, 3 separate hiding places. How many people had Harold Brennan killed? Can you determine how many remains might be in each chamber? Chen adjusted her equipment settings. The largest chamber shows what appears to be multiple sets of remains, adults and children. The other 2 show single individuals. Martinez felt his stomach clench. Are you saying we're looking at a mass grave? I'm saying you're looking at a crime scene that's been hidden for 15 years. That evening, Martinez sat in his hotel room in Tonopah, staring at the radar images on his laptop. The chambers were clearly visible, dark voids in the underground maze where Harold Brennan had hidden his victims. But knowing where they were and recovering them were 2 different things. His phone rang. Detective Sullivan. Ray, I've been thinking about the timeline. Harold Brennan killed himself in September 1987, about a year after the mine was shut down. What if he wasn't feeling guilty about the murders? What do you mean? What if he was afraid someone was getting close to discovering the truth? What if he knew the mine was going to be excavated? Martinez pulled up the state records on his computer. Let me check something. According to the mining division, the decision to seal the mine was made in August 1987. They cited safety concerns and toxic gas buildup. A month before Brennan killed himself. Exactly. What if the state wasn't planning to just seal the mine? What if they were going to do a full safety inspection first? Sullivan was quiet for a moment. He killed himself because he knew they were going to find the bodies. And now we know where to look. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Dr. Chen had spent the night analyzing the radar data and had made a disturbing discovery. Detective, you need to see this, she said, pulling up a new image on her screen. I've been mapping the entire mine system, and there's something you need to know about the main shaft. The image showed the mine's vertical shaft, but with an unexpected feature. About 200 feet down, the shaft appeared to widen into a large chamber, larger than anything shown on the original plans. This chamber is massive, Chen said, and it's filled with what appears to be debris, but the density signatures are unusual. Martinez studied the image. What kind of unusual? The patterns suggest organic material, lots of it. But there's something else. Chen switched to a different view. The chamber isn't natural. It's been excavated, probably in the 1980s. Someone spent a lot of time and effort creating this space. The realization hit Martinez like a physical blow. He wasn't just hiding bodies, he was collecting them. This chamber could contain dozens of remains. Detective, I think Harold Brennan was operating for years before anyone noticed. Martinez picked up his phone and called the Nevada State Police. This was no longer a local missing persons case. This was a serial killer investigation that could potentially involve dozens of victims from across the western United States. But first, he had to make a difficult call to Oregon. "Detective Sullivan, we've found them. The radar shows multiple remains in the mine system, including what appears to be a mass grave. We're going to need to excavate." "How many people are we talking about?" Martinez looked at the radar images spread across the table. "I don't know, maybe dozens." The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for a long moment. Finally, Sullivan spoke. "I'll call Linda Morrison. She deserves to know." That afternoon, as the sun set over the Nevada desert, Martinez stood at the sealed entrance to the Copper Ridge mine. Somewhere below, in the darkness and silence, lay the remains of David and Sarah Morrison, and God knew how many others. The mine had kept its secrets for 15 years, but not anymore. Harold Brennan's underground tomb was about to give up its dead. The excavation of Copper Ridge Mine began on a cold Nevada morning in early April. A convoy of trucks had transformed the abandoned mining town into a bustling operations center, complete with command trailers, hazmat equipment, and a mobile laboratory. Dr. Patricia Wells, the forensic anthropologist leading the recovery team, had worked mass grave sites before, but never one that had been sealed underground for 15 years. "The air quality is better than expected," reported the hazmat team leader as they emerged from the mine entrance. "We can proceed with the excavation, but everyone goes down in full protective gear." Martinez watched from the surface as the specialized team prepared to descend into Harold Brennan's tomb. The mine entrance had been widened and reinforced, with powerful lights and ventilation systems installed. What had once been a sealed grave was now a crime scene under investigation. Linda Morrison had driven down from Oregon, despite Martinez's advice to stay home. She stood beside her rental car, a small woman dwarfed by the massive operation that had grown around her family's tragedy. "Mrs. Morrison," Martinez said, approaching her carefully, "you don't have to be here for this." "Yes, I do," she replied, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "I've been waiting 15 years. I'm not leaving now." The first remains were discovered in the chamber that Pete Kowalski had identified as Harold Brennan's most recent hiding place. Dr. Wells emerged from the mine shaft after 3 hours underground, her face grim behind the protective mask. "We've recovered the remains of an adult male and a child," she reported. "Based on the clothing and personal effects, it appears to be a father and daughter. We found this with them." She held up a small plastic horse figurine, its bright colors somehow preserved in the dry mine air. Linda Morrison gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "That's Sarah's," she whispered. "She carried it everywhere. She called it Thunder because she said it could run faster than lightning." Martinez felt the weight of 15 years of questions suddenly finding their answers. "Dr. Wells, how long until we have positive identification?" "I'll need to compare dental records, but based on the clothing, the personal effects, and the approximate age of the remains, I'm confident we've found David and Sarah Morrison." The excavation continued over the following days, revealing the full scope of Harold Brennan's crimes. The main chamber that Dr. Chen had identified with the radar contained the remains of at least 12 individuals, men, women, and children who had come to Copper Ridge seeking adventure and found only death. Pete Kowalski served as an unofficial consultant, helping identify personal effects and providing context for the discoveries. His photographic records proved invaluable in matching remains to missing persons reports from across the western United States. "I remember this family," he said, looking at a photograph of a couple with 2 young children. "They were from California. The kids were so excited about seeing a real mine. Harold told me later that there had been an accident, that they'd gotten lost in the tunnels." Dr. Wells worked methodically, treating each set of remains with the respect and care that had been denied them in life. The underground chamber revealed its secrets slowly: camping gear, suitcases, children's toys, and the accumulated possessions of people who had simply wanted to explore the American West. "The bodies were carefully preserved," she explained to Martinez. "The dry air and stable temperature in the mine created almost mummified conditions. We're going to be able to identify most of these people." As the excavation progressed, the true scope of Harold Brennan's operation became clear. He had been killing visitors to the mine for at least 3 years, possibly longer. The earliest remains showed signs of having been in the mine since 1984, suggesting that Brennan had been perfecting his methods long before the Morrisons arrived. "He was organized," Detective Sullivan observed, as she reviewed the evidence. "This wasn't random violence. He was selecting victims, planning their deaths, disposing of the bodies methodically. "The question is why," Martinez said. "What turned a mining company owner into a serial killer?" The answer came from an unexpected source. While sorting through Harold Brennan's personal effects, which had been stored in a county warehouse since his death, investigators found a series of journals that revealed the disturbing psychology behind the murders. June 15, 1984, Martinez read aloud from one of the journals. "Another family today. Father too demanding, children too loud. They disturb the peace of the mine. The mine doesn't like to be disturbed." The entries revealed a man who had begun to think of the mine as a living entity that needed to be protected from intrusion. Brennan had gradually convinced himself that he was the mine's guardian, that visitors were violating something sacred. July 10, 1984. "The mine showed me the deep chamber today. It wants me to keep the loud ones quiet. They understand now. They're part of the mine forever." The journals became increasingly disturbed as Brennan's mental state deteriorated. He began to believe that the people he killed were somehow still alive in the mine, that he was creating an underground community of the dead. "This is psychotic break with reality," said Dr. James Foster, the psychiatrist consulting on the case. Brennan developed an elaborate delusion about the mine being a living entity. The murders were his way of feeding it. "But why families?" Sullivan asked. "Why not just random individuals?" Families represented noise, chaos, intrusion. In his mind, they were the greatest threat to the mine's peace. Single travelers were killed more impulsively, but families were specifically targeted. The excavation of the main chamber took 2 weeks, with each set of remains carefully documented and removed. The final count was staggering. 18 people had died in Harold Brennan's underground tomb, including David and Sarah Morrison. Linda Morrison was present when her family's remains were finally brought to the surface. She stood silently as the recovery team carried the body bags from the mine, her hand clutching the small horse figurine that had been returned to her. "Mrs. Morrison," Dr. Wells said gently, "we found something else with your daughter. She was wearing this when she died." She held out a small silver locket, the same one that Marcus Chen had found in the station wagon. Inside was the photograph of David and Sarah, smiling at the camera in happier times. "She never took it off," Linda said. "It was a birthday present from her father. She said it kept him close to her heart." The locket had been a gift from David to Sarah on her 8th birthday, just 2 months before their final trip to Nevada. Now it was the only connection between the woman who had spent 15 years waiting for answers and the little girl who had died believing her father would protect her. As the sun set over Copper Ridge, the excavation team prepared to seal the mine permanently. The underground chambers that had hidden Harold Brennan's crimes for 15 years were finally empty, their secrets exposed to the light. Martinez stood at the mine entrance, looking down into the darkness where 18 people had met their end. The investigation was far from over. Families needed to be notified, remains needed to be identified, and the full scope of Brennan's crimes needed to be documented. But for Linda Morrison, the waiting was finally over. She had her answers, and she had her family back. Not in the way she had hoped for 15 years ago, but in the only way that remained possible. The mine would be sealed forever, but the story of what happened there would live on in the memories of those who had loved the victims and the dedication of those who had refused to let their disappearances remain unsolved. The Nevada State Police conference room in Carson City had been transformed into a command center for one of the most complex forensic investigations in the state's history. Wall-mounted whiteboards displayed photographs, timelines, and victim identifications while boxes of evidence lined the floor. Detective Martinez stood before the assembled task force, preparing to present the findings that would finally close the Copper Ridge case. 18 confirmed victims, he began, his voice carrying the weight of months of investigation. Ages ranging from 6 to 64. They came from 7 different states spanning a 3-year period from 1984 to 1986. Dr. Wells presented the forensic evidence with clinical precision. Cause of death for most victims was blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with a pickaxe or similar mining tool. Evidence suggests the attacks occurred in the mine's main chamber, with bodies subsequently moved to concealed locations. Linda Morrison sat in the front row, surrounded by family members of other victims who had made the journey to Nevada. The investigation had brought together parents, siblings, and children united by their shared loss and their need for answers. The timeline reconstruction shows a clear pattern. Detective Sullivan added. Brennan would give families tours of the mine, leading them to the main chamber approximately 200 feet underground. Once isolated from any potential witnesses, he would attack. The psychological profile painted a picture of a man whose grip on reality had gradually disintegrated. Dr. Foster explained how Harold Brennan had developed what he called a guardian complex regarding the mine. Brennan's journals reveal a progressive descent into delusion. He began to believe that the mine was a sacred space that needed to be protected from intrusion. In his mind, the visitors weren't people, they were threats to be eliminated. But why didn't anyone notice? Asked Robert Chen, whose parents had been among the California family that disappeared in 1985. 18 people don't just vanish without someone asking questions. Martinez had expected this question. The genius of Brennan's operation was its isolation. Copper Ridge was 4 hours from the nearest major city, in terrain so remote that search and rescue operations were nearly impossible. Families would report their relatives missing, but without any witnesses or evidence, the investigation stalled. Additionally, Sullivan continued, Brennan had cultivated relationships with local law enforcement. He was a respected businessman who contributed to political campaigns and provided jobs in an economically depressed area. When families reported their relatives missing, the initial assumption was that they'd gotten lost in the desert or had car trouble. The investigation had uncovered evidence of a deeper conspiracy. County Sheriff Bob Matthews, who had been in office during the murders, had received regular payments from Brennan through a shell company. While there was no evidence that Matthews knew about the murders, his department had been remarkably ineffective at investigating the disappearances. Matthews retired in 1990 and died in 2003, Martinez explained. We can't prove he knew about the murders, but his department's response to the missing persons reports was inadequate by any standard. The financial records revealed that Brennan had been struggling to keep the mining operation profitable. The tour business had been his attempt to generate additional revenue, but the isolation that made the mine perfect for hiding bodies also made it difficult to attract legitimate tourists. The final piece of the puzzle, Dr. Wells said, is the evidence we found in Brennan's personal effects. His suicide note was more detailed than originally reported. She read from a photocopy. The mine has been calling to me for months. It wants me to join the others in the deep places. I can hear them down there, and they're not angry anymore. They understand that I was protecting the sacred darkness. Soon I'll be with them forever. The note continued for 3 pages, describing Brennan's belief that his victims were somehow still alive in the mine, waiting for him to join them. The final entry was dated September 15, 1987, the day before his suicide. He killed himself the night before the state mining inspectors were scheduled to arrive, Martinez explained. He knew they would discover the bodies during their safety inspection. The assembled families sat in stunned silence, absorbing the full scope of the tragedy that had consumed their loved ones. For 15 years, they had wondered what had happened. Now they knew, and the truth was somehow worse than their worst fears. Linda Morrison raised her hand. Detective Martinez, what happens now? Are there more victims we don't know about? That's possible, Mrs. Morrison. We're working with law enforcement agencies across the western United States to identify any unsolved disappearances that might be connected to Copper Ridge. The investigation is ongoing. The meeting concluded with practical matters: the return of remains to families, the schedule for trials of any surviving conspirators, and the establishment of a memorial fund for the victims. But the emotional weight of the revelations hung over the room like a shadow. After the formal presentation, Linda Morrison approached Martinez privately. Detective, I need to ask you something. My daughter, did she suffer? Martinez had been dreading this question. Mrs. Morrison, based on the forensic evidence, Sarah's death was quick. She wouldn't have had time to understand what was happening. And David, did he try to protect her? The evidence suggests he fought back. Your husband died trying to save your daughter. I'm sorry it wasn't enough. Linda nodded, tears streaming down her face. I need to see the mine. I need to see where they died. Mrs. Morrison, I don't think that's advisable. The mine is going to be permanently sealed tomorrow. Please. I've waited 15 years for answers. I need to say goodbye. The next morning, Linda Morrison descended into the Copper Ridge mine for the first and last time. Accompanied by Martinez and Dr. Wells, she made the journey into the underground chamber where her family had died. The mine had been stripped of evidence and cleaned of any traces of the murders, but the atmosphere of the place was unmistakably sinister. The main chamber was vast and silent, lit by temporary worklights that cast eerie shadows on the rock walls. "This is where it happened," Martinez said quietly. "According to the evidence, families would gather here while Brennan explained the mining process." Linda stood in the center of the chamber, trying to imagine her daughter's final moments. Sarah would have been excited, asking questions about the mining equipment, probably clutching her toy horse. David would have been protective, keeping Sarah close, not realizing the danger until it was too late. "I forgive you," she said suddenly, her voice echoing in the silence. "Mrs. Morrison, I forgive Harold Brennan. I forgive him for taking my family. I forgive him for the 15 years of not knowing. I forgive him because carrying hatred for this long is killing me." She knelt and placed a small bouquet of flowers on the ground, roses from her garden in Oregon, Sarah's favorite color. "I love you both. I'll see you again someday." The ascent to the surface felt like emerging from a nightmare. As the sunlight hit her face, Linda Morrison felt something she hadn't experienced in 15 years. Peace. Not happiness, not joy, but the absence of the terrible uncertainty that had haunted her for so long. That afternoon, the entrance to the Copper Ridge mine was sealed with concrete and steel. A simple marker would be placed at the site, acknowledging the victims without glorifying their killer. The town of Copper Ridge would remain abandoned, left to the desert and the memories of those who had survived. The Morrison case was finally closed, but its impact would last far longer than the investigation. Changes in missing persons protocols, improvements in interagency communication, and new standards for investigating disappearances in remote areas would all trace their origins to the discoveries made in a sealed mine in Nevada. For Linda Morrison, the end of the investigation marked the beginning of a new chapter. She would return to Oregon, to her job teaching 3rd grade, to the house where she had waited for 15 years, but she would no longer be waiting. She would be living, carrying the memory of her family forward into whatever time remained to her. The Nevada desert would keep many secrets, but the secret of what happened to David and Sarah Morrison would never again be one of them. 3 months after the Copper Ridge mine was sealed, Linda Morrison stood in her daughter's former bedroom, now transformed into a memorial space that felt more like a shrine than a room. The walls were covered with photographs spanning Sarah's brief life, from her first baby pictures to the last school photo taken just weeks before her disappearance. The discovery of her family's remains had brought closure, but also a profound sense of emptiness. For 15 years, Linda had defined herself by her search for answers. Now that she had them, she wasn't sure who she was supposed to be. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Detective Martinez's voice carried across the miles from Nevada. "Mrs. Morrison, I wanted to update you on the investigation. We've identified 3 more families who disappeared while visiting Copper Ridge. The total victim count is now 21. Linda sank into the chair by the window, the same chair where she'd spent countless hours wondering what had happened to her family. 21 people. How did no one notice? The isolation worked in Brennan's favor, but Mrs. Morrison, there's something else. We found evidence that Brennan may have had help. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. What kind of help? Financial records show regular payments to someone with the initials RK. We believe it stands for Roy Kowalski, Pete Kowalski's son. He worked at the mine in 1986 and disappeared shortly after Brennan's suicide. Linda remembered Pete Kowalski, the elderly man who had preserved the photographic evidence that helped solve the case. The idea that his son might have been involved in the murders seemed impossible. Are you saying Pete knew? We don't think so. Roy was estranged from his father, had a history of drug problems and violent behavior. Pete thought his son had simply moved away. We think Roy helped Brennan dispose of the bodies and clean up the crime scenes. The investigation had revealed a more complex operation than anyone had initially imagined. Roy Kowalski had been Brennan's accomplice, handling the logistical aspects of the murders, while his father unknowingly provided alibis and maintained the appearance of a legitimate business. Where is Roy now? We're not sure. He hasn't been seen since 1987. We've issued a nationwide alert, but after 35 years he could be anywhere. After ending the call, Linda walked through her house, seeing it with new eyes. The living room where she'd held vigils for her missing family, the kitchen where she'd prepared thousands of meals for one, the bedroom where she'd spent countless sleepless nights wondering if David and Sarah were still alive somewhere. The house felt like a museum of interrupted lives, preserved exactly as it had been when she still believed her family might come home. But they weren't coming home, and it was time to start living again. She called her sister in Portland, someone she'd barely spoken to during the years of searching. "Karen, it's Linda. I need to ask you something. Is the offer still open?" "What offer?" "To come stay with you for a while. To get away from all this." Karen's voice was cautious. "Linda, are you sure? You've been in that house for 29 years. That's the problem. I've been living in the past for 15 years. I need to remember what it feels like to have a future." The decision to leave Pendleton wasn't easy. Linda had built her entire adult life around the search for her family, turning down job opportunities, relationships and travel because she felt obligated to stay close to home in case David and Sarah returned. But they had returned in a way. Their remains were buried in Pendleton Cemetery, in a plot Linda had purchased with insurance money she'd never spent. They were home and she was free to go. As she packed boxes in Sarah's room, Linda found herself sorting through memories she'd preserved like artifacts, school papers, artwork, toys, and clothes that had been waiting for a little girl who would never grow up. She decided to donate most of Sarah's belongings to the local children's shelter, keeping only a few special items. The horse figurine found with her daughter's remains, a handmade Mother's Day card, and a photograph of Sarah and David building a snowman the winter before they disappeared. The house sold quickly to a young family with 2 children, and Linda found herself oddly comforted by the idea of laughter filling the rooms again. The new owners were respectful of the house's history, but eager to make it their own, painting over the careful preservation of the past. Linda's last night in the house was spent in the kitchen, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise paint the blue mountains in shades of pink and gold. She had watched this same sunrise for thousands of mornings, but this was the first time in 15 years that she felt hopeful about what the day might bring. Portland was a revelation. Linda had forgotten what it felt like to be anonymous, to walk through crowds of people who didn't know her story or offer sympathetic smiles. Her sister Karen had prepared a small apartment above her art gallery, a space filled with light and possibility. "I've been thinking about what you said," Karen told her over dinner, "about needing to remember what it feels like to have a future. I have an idea." Karen had been running her gallery for 10 years, specializing in local artists and community art programs. She had been wanting to expand into art therapy, working with people who had experienced trauma. "You've been a teacher for 15 years, Linda. You understand how to help people process difficult emotions, and you've been through something most people can't imagine. You could help others who are dealing with loss." The idea seemed impossible at first. Linda had spent so many years focused on her own grief that she couldn't imagine helping others with theirs. But as she thought about it, she realized that the search for her family had taught her something valuable about hope and persistence. She enrolled in a graduate program in art therapy, using her teaching experience as a foundation for understanding how creative expression could help people heal. The coursework was challenging, but for the first time in years, Linda felt her mind expanding beyond the boundaries of her personal tragedy. Her thesis project focused on memorial art, helping people create artistic tributes to loved ones they had lost. The work was deeply personal, drawing on her own experience of preserving Sarah's memory while learning to live without her. "Grief isn't something you get over," Linda wrote in her thesis. "It's something you learn to carry differently. Art can help us transform the weight of loss into something meaningful." Meanwhile, the investigation in Nevada continued. Detective Martinez had established a cold case task force dedicated to identifying other potential victims of Harold Brennan and Roy Kowalski. The discovery of the Copper Ridge murders had opened up dozens of other missing persons cases from the 1980s. "We're working with the FBI now," Martinez told Linda during one of their regular phone calls. "The scope of this case goes far beyond what we initially thought. Brennan and Kowalski may have been operating for years before they started killing at the mine. The investigation had revealed a pattern of unexplained disappearances throughout the western United States, all involving families or individuals who had been traveling through remote areas. The common thread was contact with businesses or individuals associated with tourism or outdoor recreation. The theory is that Brennan and Kowalski were part of a larger network," Martinez explained. "People who used their legitimate businesses to identify and target victims. We're looking at hunting guides, campground owners, tour operators, anyone who had access to isolated travelers." Linda found herself oddly detached from these developments, The discovery of her family's remains had satisfied her need for answers, but the expanding investigation felt like someone else's story. She was finally free to build a life that wasn't defined by loss. Her art therapy practice grew slowly but steadily. She worked with veterans, survivors of domestic violence, and families dealing with sudden loss. Each client brought their own story of trauma and survival, and Linda found that her experience with long-term grief had prepared her to help others navigate their own difficult journeys. One of her clients was a woman named Margaret, whose son had disappeared while hiking in Colorado 5 years earlier. Like Linda, Margaret had spent years searching for answers, refusing to accept that her child might be dead. "I keep thinking he's out there somewhere," Margaret said during one of their sessions, "that he's hurt or lost or being held somewhere. I can't stop looking for him." Linda understood. "I spent 15 years believing my daughter might come home. I kept her room exactly the way she left it, just in case." But Margaret, preserving hope isn't the same as preserving life. Through her work with clients like Margaret, Linda began to understand that her experience with loss had given her a unique ability to help others find their way through grief. She had learned that survival wasn't about forgetting or moving on, but about finding ways to carry love forward into an uncertain future. The art therapy sessions often resulted in powerful memorial pieces, paintings, sculptures, and mixed media works that helped people process their emotions and honor their loved ones. Linda kept photographs of these pieces, creating a gallery of healing that reminded her why her work mattered. As the first anniversary of the Copper Ridge discovery approached, Linda found herself thinking about the mine less and less. The sealed entrance had become a symbol of closure, but it was no longer the focus of her daily thoughts. She had found a way to live with her loss without being consumed by it. The 21 victims of Harold Brennan and Roy Kowalski would not be forgotten, but they would also not be the only legacy of their story. Linda Morrison had transformed her own survival into a tool for helping others, proving that even the darkest chapters could be part of a larger story of hope and healing. Detective Martinez received the call on a Tuesday morning in September, exactly 1 year after the Copper Ridge mine had been sealed. The voice on the other end was nervous, uncertain, speaking in broken English with a strong accent. "My name is Rosa Villalobos. I work at the Desert View Retirement Home in Tucson. I have a patient who has been asking for police. He says he has information about murders in Nevada." Martinez felt the familiar tingle of a case about to break open. "What kind of information?" "He's very sick, Detective. Cancer. He might not have much time, but he keeps saying he needs to tell someone about the mine, about people who died." The retirement home was a low-slung building surrounded by desert landscape, the kind of place where people went to die quietly. Martinez made the drive from Las Vegas, hoping he wasn't chasing another dead end. The patient was in room 147, a gaunt man in his 70s connected to oxygen tanks and IV drips. His eyes were alert despite his obvious illness, and when Martinez entered the room, he struggled to sit up. "You're the detective investigating Copper Ridge." His voice was barely a whisper. "That's right. I'm Detective Martinez. The nurse said you have information about the murders." The man's eyes filled with tears. "My name is Roy Kowalski. I've been running from what I did for 35 years. Martinez felt his pulse quicken. This was the missing piece of the puzzle, the accomplice they'd been searching for since the investigation began. "Mr. Kowalski, I need to read you your rights before we continue." "I don't care about rights. I'm dying. I need to tell someone what really happened at that mine." After the Miranda warning, Roy Kowalski began to speak, his words tumbling out like water through a broken dam. The story he told was worse than anything the investigation had uncovered. "Harold Brennan wasn't the mastermind," he said. "I was. The whole thing was my idea." According to Roy, he had been working odd jobs around mining towns throughout the West since his discharge from the army in 1978. He developed a hatred for tourists and travelers, people he saw as invaders of his territory. They would come through these places like they owned them, taking pictures, buying souvenirs, treating our lives like some kind of theme park. I started to think about how easy it would be to make some of them disappear. The plan had been simple at first. Roy would identify isolated travelers, follow them to remote locations, and rob them. But the first murder had been accidental. A family from Utah who had fought back when he tried to steal their camping equipment. I panicked and killed them all. Then I had to figure out how to get rid of the bodies. That's when I thought about the mine. Roy had buried the Utah family in an abandoned mine shaft, then realized he'd found the perfect disposal method. When he met Harold Brennan and learned about the tour business, he saw an opportunity to expand his operation. Harold was mentally ill, detective. He had these delusions about the mine being sacred, about protecting it from intruders. I fed into those delusions, convinced him that the tourists were defiling something holy. The partnership had worked perfectly. Roy would identify suitable victims, families traveling alone, people who wouldn't be missed immediately. Brennan would give them the tour, leading them into the mine where Roy would be waiting. I did most of the killing. Harold would help move the bodies, but he thought we were performing some kind of religious ritual. He never understood that it was just murder. The scope of the crimes was staggering. Roy estimated they had killed at least 30 people over 3 years, far more than the 21 victims identified by the investigation. Some of the bodies were never put in the mine, he said. I buried them in the desert, scattered them across hundreds of miles. You'll never find them all. Martinez struggled to process the magnitude of what he was hearing. Why did you stop? Harold was getting unstable. He started talking about joining the victims in the mine, about how they were calling to him. I knew he was going to crack, so I ran. Roy had used his share of the money stolen from victims to create a new identity. He'd worked construction jobs throughout the Southwest, never staying in one place for long, always afraid that someone would recognize him. I kept track of the investigation over the years. When I heard about the mine being excavated, I knew it was over. I've been waiting for you to find me. The confession continued for hours, with Roy providing details about victims that had never been reported missing. Hitchhikers, drifters, people whose disappearances had gone unnoticed. The true scope of the Copper Ridge murders would never be fully known. There's one more thing, Roy said as Martinez prepared to leave. Harold didn't kill himself because he was feeling guilty. He killed himself because I told him to. The final revelation was the most chilling. Roy had convinced the mentally ill Brennan that suicide was the only way to join the victims in the mine, that death would allow him to become one with the sacred space he thought he was protecting. I wrote that suicide note, detective. Harold could barely write his own name by the end. I needed him dead before he could tell anyone about my involvement. Martinez left the retirement home with a confession that would rewrite the entire case. Roy Kowalski wasn't just Harold Brennan's accomplice. He was the architect of one of the most extensive serial killing sprees in American history. The legal proceedings were complicated by Roy's terminal illness. He died 6 weeks after his confession, but not before providing detailed information about burial sites throughout Nevada, Arizona, and Utah. The investigation expanded to include dozens of law enforcement agencies and would continue for years. Linda Morrison learned about Roy's confession through a phone call from Detective Martinez. The news was devastating, not because it changed what had happened to her family, but because it revealed that their deaths had been even more senseless than she'd imagined. He didn't kill them because of some delusion about the mine, Martinez explained. He killed them because he enjoyed it. Your family was just randomly selected. The randomness of it was somehow worse than the delusion. Linda had found some comfort in thinking that Harold Brennan's mental illness had been the cause of her family's death. Learning that they had been murdered by someone who was completely sane made the loss feel even more cruel. But Linda had spent the past year learning to live with uncertainty, and she found that she could absorb this new information without being destroyed by it. Roy Kowalski's confession didn't change the fact that David and Sarah were gone, and it didn't change her determination to help others heal from their own losses. I'm glad he confessed, she told Martinez. Not because it makes me feel better, but because it might help other families find answers. Roy's information led to the discovery of 7 more burial sites across 3 states. Families who had been searching for missing relatives for decades finally received the closure that Linda Morrison had fought for so long to find. The Copper Ridge case became a textbook example of how serial killers could exploit remote locations and inadequate law enforcement resources. Changes in missing persons protocols, improvements in interagency communication, and new standards for investigating disappearances in isolated areas all traced their origins to the discoveries made in a sealed mine in Nevada. Linda Morrison continued her work as an art therapist, helping clients process their own experiences with loss and trauma. She had learned that survival wasn't about forgetting or moving on, but about finding ways to carry love forward into an uncertain future. The mine remained sealed, But the story of what happened there lived on in the memories of those who had loved the victims and the dedication of those who had refused to let their disappearances remain unsolved. On the second anniversary of the mine's excavation, Linda visited the cemetery where David and Sarah were buried. She brought flowers from her garden in Portland, roses and daisies that Sarah would have loved, and spent an hour talking to them about her new life. "I'm okay," she told them. "I'm not happy, but I'm okay. I'm helping other people find their way through the darkness. I think you would be proud of me." The desert wind that had hidden the mine's secrets for so long continued to blow across Nevada, but it no longer carried the weight of unanswered questions. The truth had been revealed, justice had been served, and the survivors had found ways to build meaningful lives from the ruins of their loss. 5 years after the Copper Ridge mine was sealed, Linda Morrison stood in the main exhibition hall of the Pacific Northwest Memorial Art Center, watching visitors move through the gallery she had helped create. The space was filled with artwork created by families who had experienced sudden loss, paintings, sculptures, and mixed media pieces that transformed grief into something tangible and beautiful. "It's remarkable what you've built here," said Dr. Sarah Chen, the forensic anthropologist who had worked on the excavation. She had become a friend over the years, bonding with Linda over their shared experience of confronting the aftermath of extreme violence. "It's not just my work," Linda replied, gesturing to the walls covered with memorial art. "Every piece here represents someone's journey through loss. I just help them find their way to the other side." The Memorial Art Center had grown from Linda's thesis project into a nationally recognized program. Families from across the country came to participate in workshops where they could create lasting tributes to their loved ones while processing their grief through artistic expression. Linda had found that her experience with the long uncertainty of David and Sarah's disappearance had given her unique insights into helping others navigate their own difficult journeys. She understood the difference between hope and false hope, between healing and simply surviving. "I have something for you," Dr. Chen said, pulling a small wooden box from her bag. "It's from the final excavation at Copper Ridge. We found it in one of the side chambers." Inside the box was a child's drawing, somehow preserved in the dry air of the mine. It showed a stick-figure family, a tall man, a woman, and a little girl, standing next to a car. At the bottom, in careful second-grade handwriting, were the words, "My Family Adventure." Linda studied the drawing, her eyes filling with tears. "This is Sarah's work. She must have drawn it during their trip. We thought you should have it. It's the only artwork we found in the mine." Linda held the drawing carefully, seeing in it the excitement and anticipation that had driven her daughter to document their final adventure. Sarah had been so proud of her artistic abilities, always eager to show her mother her latest creation. She was documenting their trip, Linda realized. She probably had a whole collection of drawings that were lost. The discovery of the drawing prompted Linda to create a new program at the Memorial Art Center. The Found Stories project helped families create artwork based on recovered personal items, transforming objects associated with trauma into sources of healing and connection. Linda worked with a local artist to create a large painting based on Sarah's drawing, expanding the stick figure family into a detailed portrait of the adventure that had been interrupted by violence. The painting showed David and Sarah exploring a beautiful landscape, their faces filled with joy and wonder. "It's not about denying what happened," Linda explained to the workshop participants. "It's about remembering the love that existed before the loss. They were happy when she drew this. They were together and they were having an adventure." The painting became the centerpiece of the Memorial Art Center's permanent collection, representing the possibility of finding beauty and meaning even in the darkest circumstances. Visitors often spent long periods standing before it, finding in it a message of hope that transcended the specific tragedy it commemorated. Meanwhile, the investigation into the Copper Ridge murders continued to yield new discoveries. Detective Martinez had been promoted to head the cold case division, and the task force he had established had identified 43 potential victims of Roy Kowalski and Harold Brennan. "We'll never know the full scope of what they did," Martinez told Linda during one of their regular phone calls, "but we've been able to provide answers to families who had been searching for decades. That's something." The case had led to changes in how law enforcement agencies shared information about missing persons cases. The National Missing and Unidentified Persons System had been expanded and improved, making it easier to identify patterns that might indicate serial crimes. Linda had testified before Congress about the need for better resources for families of missing persons, drawing on her own experience of navigating the system during the years of uncertainty about David and Sarah's fate. "The investigation doesn't end when the search does," she told the Senate subcommittee. "Families need ongoing support, and they need to know that their loved ones haven't been forgotten." Her advocacy work had led to legislation providing funding for family support services and improved training for law enforcement officers dealing with missing persons cases. The Morrison Act was signed into law 3 years after the Copper Ridge discovery. Linda had also written a book about her experience, The Long Way to Family's Journey Through Loss and Discovery. The book became a bestseller, but more importantly, it provided a resource for other families dealing with similar situations. "I didn't write it to make money," she explained in interviews. "I wrote it because I wanted other families to know that it's possible to survive the worst thing you can imagine." The book's success led to speaking engagements across the country, where Linda shared her story with audiences ranging from law enforcement officers to support groups for families of missing persons. She had become an unwitting expert on grief and resilience, roles she had never sought but had learned to embrace. Her personal life had also begun to heal. She had started dating again, tentatively at first, then with more confidence as she learned to trust her own judgment about the future. She had met Robert, a widower who taught at Portland State University at a grief support group. "I'm not looking for someone to replace David," she told her sister Karen. "I'm looking for someone to share the life I've built since losing him." Robert understood the complexity of Linda's situation. He had lost his wife to cancer 5 years earlier and had his own experience with building a new life after devastating loss. Their relationship developed slowly, based on mutual respect and shared understanding of what it meant to love someone while carrying the memory of previous love. They had decided to marry, a decision that had surprised Linda as much as anyone. She had assumed that part of her life was over, that she would spend her remaining years focused on her work and the memory of her family. "David would want me to be happy," she told the therapist she had been seeing. "He would want me to live fully, not just survive." The wedding was small, held in the garden of the Memorial Arts Center with close friends and family in attendance. Linda wore a simple blue dress and carried a bouquet that included roses in Sarah's favorite color. During the ceremony, she included a moment of silence for David and Sarah, acknowledging their continued presence in her life. The reception featured artwork created by the center's participants, turning the celebration into a showcase for the healing power of creative expression. Linda's favorite piece was a sculpture created by a woman whose son had been killed in a car accident, a bronze figure of a child reaching toward the sky, his face filled with joy and wonder. "This is what I want people to remember," the artist had said. "Not how he died, but how he lived." As Linda and Robert danced their first dance as husband and wife, she felt a presence she hadn't experienced in years. Not the haunting weight of unresolved grief, but the warm comfort of love that transcended death. She could feel David and Sarah watching her, not with sadness but with approval. The Memorial Arts Center continued to grow, expanding to include programs for veterans, survivors of domestic violence, and families dealing with sudden loss. Linda had found her life's work in helping others transform their pain into something meaningful and beautiful. "Grief isn't something you get over," she often told her clients. "It's something you learn to carry differently, and sometimes, if you're lucky, you learn to carry it with grace." The center's walls were covered with artwork that told stories of loss and survival, each piece representing someone's journey through the darkness and into the light. Linda walked among them every day, reminded of the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love to endure even the most terrible circumstances. The Copper Ridge mine remained sealed, but the story of what happened there had become part of a larger narrative about survival, healing, and the possibility of finding meaning in the aftermath of senseless violence. Linda Morrison had transformed her own journey through loss into a beacon of hope for others, proving that even the darkest chapters could be part of a story of redemption and renewal. 10 years after the Copper Ridge mine was sealed, Linda Morrison Parks stood at the edge of the Nevada desert, looking out at the landscape that had once held her family's remains. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust, familiar smells that no longer brought pain, but instead evoked a sense of completion. She had returned to Nevada for the dedication of the Copper Ridge Memorial, a simple granite monument erected at the site where the mine had been located. The names of all 43 confirmed victims were engraved on the stone, a permanent record of lives cut short by violence. "I never thought I'd come back here," she told Detective Martinez, who had also returned for the ceremony. He was nearing retirement, grey-haired and weathered by years of investigating humanity's darkest impulses. "It's fitting that you're here," he replied. "This memorial exists because you refused to give up. You kept asking questions when everyone else had moved on." The memorial service drew families from across the country, parents, siblings, children, and spouses who had lost loved ones to Roy Kowalski and Harold Brennan. Linda had become a focal point for many of these families. Her journey from victim to survivor, to advocate inspiring others to find their own paths through grief. Margaret Reeves, the woman whose son had disappeared in Colorado, approached Linda after the service. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "The work you did at the center helped me accept that Tommy was gone. I was able to say goodbye." Linda embraced her, remembering the angry, desperate woman who had first come to the Memorial Art Center 5 years earlier. Margaret had created a series of paintings depicting her son's love of mountain climbing, transforming her obsession with finding him into a celebration of his life. "You did the work, Margaret. I just provided the space." The memorial ceremony was simple but profound. A local minister read the names of the victims, and family members placed flowers at the base of the monument. Linda had brought roses from her garden in Portland, the same variety she had planted in memory of Sarah. When Sarah's name was read, Linda stepped forward and placed her flowers at the memorial. "I love you, baby girl," she whispered. "I'll always love you." The wind picked up, scattering rose petals across the desert floor. Linda watched them disappear into the landscape, carrying with them the last of her need to hold onto the past. After the ceremony, Linda walked to the location where the mine entrance had been. The ground was level now, showing no sign of the horror that had been concealed beneath it. Desert plants had begun to reclaim the area, their roots digging deep into soil that had once hidden terrible secrets. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 25 years earlier, she had been a young mother whose life had been shattered by loss. The intervening years had been filled with pain, searching, and eventually healing. The Memorial Art Center had become her life's work, helping hundreds of families process their grief and find ways to honor their loved ones. She had written 3 books about grief and resilience, each one drawing on her own experience and the stories of the people she had helped. Her marriage to Robert had given her something she had never expected to have again, a partner who understood both her strength and her vulnerability. They had built a life together that honored the past while embracing the future. "Are you ready to go?" Robert asked, joining her at the memorial site. He had been quiet during the ceremony, understanding that this was Linda's moment to close a chapter of her life. "I think so," she replied. "I think I'm finally ready to let them rest." The drive back to Las Vegas took them through the same desert landscape where David and Sarah had made their final journey. Linda looked out at the vast emptiness, no longer seeing it as a place of menace but as a landscape of endless possibility. "I want to make a stop," she said as they approached the city. "There's something I need to do." Marcus Chen was still running his salvage yard, though he was talking about retirement. He remembered Linda immediately, recognizing the woman who had unknowingly launched one of the most significant criminal investigations in Nevada history. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm sorry, Mrs. Parks. I heard about the memorial. I wish I could have been there." "You were there in spirit, Marcus. You were the one who made that first phone call. If you hadn't cared enough to contact the police, we might never have found them." Marcus walked with Linda to the corner of the yard where he had first discovered the Morrison station wagon. The space was now occupied by a more recent wreck, but Linda could still picture the burgundy Ford Country Squire that had held the first clues to her family's fate. "I kept something," Marcus said, producing a small wooden box. "The glove compartment had these inside. I thought you might want them someday." The box contained David's reading glasses, Sarah's favorite pencil, and a small notebook where David had been keeping track of their travel expenses. Simple objects that had once been part of their daily lives, now transformed into precious relics. "Thank you," Linda said, holding the glasses that David had worn while grading papers at the kitchen table. "These mean more to me than you know." The flight back to Portland gave Linda time to reflect on the ceremony and her decision to finally let go of the investigative role she had played for so many years. She had spent a quarter-century seeking answers, and now she had them all. The Memorial Arts Center would continue its work under the leadership of younger staff members, But Linda was ready to step back from the day-to-day operations. She wanted to spend more time with Robert, travel, and perhaps write a final book about the journey from victim to survivor to advocate. "I'm proud of what we've built," she told Robert as they landed in Portland. "But I'm ready for a new chapter." That evening, Linda stood in her garden, surrounded by the roses she had planted in memory of Sarah and the vegetables that Robert had helped her grow. The garden was a perfect metaphor for her life. Beauty growing from ground that had once been barren, nourishment emerging from careful tending and patience. She thought about the families she had helped over the years, each one finding their own way through grief and loss. The Memorial Art Center's walls were covered with their creations, paintings, sculptures, and mixed media pieces that transformed pain into beauty. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Detective Martinez was calling from Nevada. "Linda, I wanted to let you know that we've officially closed the Copper Ridge case. The task force is being disbanded, and the investigation is complete." "How many victims did you eventually identify?" 43 confirmed, with evidence suggesting there may have been more. It was one of the most extensive serial killing operations in American history. Linda absorbed this information, feeling the weight of all those lives lost to senseless violence. What happens now? Now we remember them. The memorial you helped dedicate today ensures they won't be forgotten, and the changes in missing persons protocols mean that future cases will be handled differently. After ending the call, Linda sat in her garden as the sun set over the Portland skyline. The city lights began to twinkle in the distance, each one representing lives being lived, families being formed, and stories being written. She thought about David and Sarah, frozen in time at the ages they had been when they disappeared. In her mind, they would always be the loving father and excited 8-year-old who had embarked on an adventure that became a tragedy. But she also thought about the hundreds of families who had found healing at the Memorial Art Center, the legislation that had been passed to help other families of missing persons, and the law enforcement officers who had been trained to handle these cases with greater sensitivity. David and Sarah's deaths had been senseless, but their memory had been transformed into something meaningful. They had become part of a larger story about the power of love to survive even the most terrible circumstances. Linda pulled out her phone and scrolled through the photos from the memorial ceremony. Families standing together, supporting each other, finding strength in shared experience. The memorial monument with its 43 names, ensuring that the victims would never be forgotten. She stopped at a photo of herself placing roses at the memorial, her face peaceful for the first time in years. The woman in the photo looked like someone who had found her way through the darkness and into the light. "I did it," she whispered to the evening air. "I found them, and I found myself." The Nevada desert wind that had hidden the mine's secrets for so long continued to blow across the landscape, but it no longer carried the weight of unanswered questions. The truth had been revealed, justice had been served, and the survivors had found ways to build meaningful lives from the ruins of their loss. Linda Morrison Parks had completed her journey from victim to survivor to advocate, transforming her own experience of devastating loss into a beacon of hope for others. The Memorial Art Center would continue to help families heal. The legislation she had championed would protect future victims, and the memory of David and Sarah Morrison would live on in the lives that had been touched by their story. The long wait was finally over. The answers had been found, and Linda Morrison Parks was ready to begin the next chapter of her life, carrying the love of her lost family forward into whatever future remained to be written. In the distance, the lights of Portland twinkled like stars, each one representing a life being lived, a story being told, and a future being shaped by the choices made in the present moment. Linda looked toward those lights and smiled, knowing that she was finally free to join the living world that had been waiting for her all along. The story of Copper Ridge was finished, but the story of Linda Morrison Parks was just beginning, and for the first time in 25 years, she was looking forward to seeing how it would end.